Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flammang, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uyeyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Thursday, February 6th. Deland McCullough, as reported by an up-and-coming journalist in the industry, Matt Freeman of IrishSportsDaily.com. Deland McCullough is off to the Las Vegas Raiders. I almost said Los Angeles Raiders. That would have been wrong a couple of different times.
I almost wrote Oakland.
Oakland, Los Angeles, and then Oakland, and now Las Vegas. He is off to the Las Vegas Raiders. Pete Carroll took him from Notre Dame. So he's going to go back to the NFL, and Notre Dame is in need of a running back coach. Of course, Mr. University, I made a bet with myself. Is Jamie going to have the running back candidate list ready to go before the show? He did. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Notre Dame's running back room, the impact this might have on the room, what kind of impact running back coaches and how hard it is to find those, quality coach to do that. And then we'll talk about, a bunch of other things regarding Notre Dame football. Jamie put some six thoughts on a Thursday today, talking about talent acquisition and the types of players that Notre Dame is trying to bring in for their football team. Now, not like RKGs, but that sort of, thing. The type of player they're looking to bring in. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. If you like what you hear, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. So whenever it is, we are going to go live. We're still around 450 away from 10K. We want to get 10K before spring practice. If you could share the show with your friends, subscribe to it if you haven't done so, that would be great. That would be awesome. We would really appreciate that. And as always, the show is brought to you by ESQ Clothing, founded by Notre Dame alum Ge Wang. You've seen ESQ and all your favorite Notre Dame players and coaches with over a decade of making the best custom clothing available. ESQ will help you look and feel your best in 2025, from a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or the perfect tuxedo for wedding season. Check out Ge's amazing work at esqclothing.com. Book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Jamie, can we say this isn't really that big of a surprise? Deland McCullough was around for, I think it was 3 seasons. That sounds about right to me. That he would, any position coach of his caliber would be. He's going back up to the NFL. Did a good job at Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame doesn't want to lose him, but you understand why they do, and you got to make a good hire now. Anything else to take from that?
Well, I think everyone thought he wasn't going to be at Notre Dame. Even this long, I think it was a long time, considering that, he's someone that was in demand every single offseason. Like I probably got, I'd say I've probably had 6 texts in the last 2 years from Matt Freeman. Hey, get a running back coach list ready. Like that. That has happened because he has been like, he almost got the Ohio head coaching job. Like he was, he interviewed multiple times. I think most people thought he was going to get it. So that was something that was like around, I want to say like the Indiana game that was like, he almost got that. So it was, that almost happened right before the playoff kind of thing. So it was just kind of a matter of when, because either he could have stayed for another year, but he was going to, he wants to be a head coach, and he's going to do whatever it takes to kind of get to that. And, frankly, he deserves a chance based on, what he's done and how he is as a coach. And he's certainly he's a very, very good coach. Right. So, it's tough to replace a guy like that, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of good, people that will be interested in the job.
Yeah. What would you say the most kind of impressive thing that Deland McCullough did at Notre Dame, whether it's developing a certain player, developing a running back room that plays with a certain style, getting multiple running backs, different roles, whatever it might be. What do you think is the kind of the thing that you think about Deland McCullough's greatest success at Notre Dame? He has a few, in my opinion. I'm curious to think of, like, what do you think of when you think Deland McCullough? Like, if someone asks you, what did what is the one thing that Deland McCullough brought to Notre Dame or did for Notre Dame? What comes to mind for you?
I think, just details, right, of how those guys played the position, I think, right? You look at it, Sid Irish mentioned like the lack of fumbles. I mean, it's definitely a thing, but I also think some of that is like, I mean, Kyron Williams is a guy who's going to fumble. Like he's
a big fumbler in the NFL. Yeah.
He's had fumble problems this whole time. I don't think it makes him less of a great back, and obviously McCullough didn't coach Kyron, so maybe he would have made it a little bit less, but I don't think like that wasn't the thing that made it, because there's a lot of times too, and I think there's so much with the running back position, it's so much about just like that guy's talent and that his ability. But when we're talking about you getting multiple guys, I think what you said about like multiple guys having roles, being able to step in and do things, it's the attention to detail of all of those guys. And you see just the improvement from guys like Jeremiah Love. From Price is a better back than he was, a year ago. Audric Estime is a perfect example. Like he was a much better back from year to year, right? I think Logan Diggs, I know he left, but he was a guy who got better under him. Like so I just think that's something that there's a reason why he's viewed and respected that way, and why because if you look at like sometimes it's easy to just say like, man, this guy coached Jeremiah Love, like, man, he must be a heck of a coach. It's like, well, it's a lot easier to coach when it's Jeremiah Love than it's someone else. But look at what he was when he was with Kansas City Chiefs. He didn't have like a ton of all pros, but like all those guys were like just good players, right? Like good at their jobs. And I mean, that's the job of a coach. Like you get all those guys ready for those situations.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people have been frustrated by the usage of Aeneas Williams this year, just because it wasn't Jeremiah Love, and it wasn't, and that's what people wanted, right? Like they wanted Jeremiah Love to kind of be the guy there. But look, it paid off, right? Like he was a playmaker in the playoffs. He made plays that helped Notre Dame win against Penn State, right? When the game was in doubt. He had Jeremiah Love playing a big role in the Ohio State game last year, when it was just like he wasn't a huge part of the offense, but he had a package for the Ohio State game. He was very effective in that, right? So he was very good at getting guys ready to play as young players, right? Aeneas Williams ready to play. Audric Estime and Logan Diggs ready to play. It's Aeneas Williams. I already brought him up, I think. So that's kind of an example of that. Jabron Payne had a role last year. A lot of people were frustrated by that, but I think it's unfortunate for us, and especially for Jabron Payne, that he was injured in the spring. We talked a bunch about how good he looked and how he was kind of poised to break out. So he did a very good job of getting guys ready to play. I do think like the one thing that I think is his best accomplishment at Notre Dame is actually the development and the elevation of the game of Jeremiah Love, the best player. Because Jeremiah Love, when he came in, like Deland McCullough was very much on him about, you have to be a complete back. You can't just be a runner, and you have to be the certain type of runner. He talked a lot about, you got to be about it. And Jeremiah Love really took that to heart. I don't think that anyone imagined, myself included, that he would be the type of back that he is now, right? He always had that speed. He always had that long speed. But like, is he going to be an inside runner? Is he going to be able to take contact and run through contact? And he did do that, right? He was not a great blocker, but he certainly got better as a blocker as the year went on. The jump that he made even during his freshman season, like I think, a lot of the time, like you said, it's easy to coach a talented player, but I don't think that any old coach could have gotten Jeremiah Love to where he was this year. I thought he was a special running back. I think that's very much a credit to Deland McCullough and what he was able to do. It was mentioned in the chat. It's kind of a weird recruiting cycle for him, right? They did end up with Nolan James, which I think we're both excited about him. We're both excited about that. But I think what he did for Notre Dame, I think in hindsight, it was a home run that Marcus Freeman hit when it came to Deland McCullough. And so he has to do it again at the running back position, right? Because it's a talented room and you don't want to mess that up. What are some of the names that you think are good fits for the position now. And it's too soon to gauge likelihood or anything like that. This is you put out your list. Your hit rate on the list is pretty good. So let's talk about some of the names, Jamie. Who kind of pops out to you?
Yeah. So before I get to the list, because I know the one guy, who mentioned.
Oh yeah,
Montgomery. So I'll just get him out of the way, just because I know that guy asked him. Was like he's pretty hyped about him.
And Tim Kelly, Tim asked me this on Twitter as well. So he wants to talk about James Montgomery. Also, well, let's throw out Raphael Caldwell talked about Tony Alford. I don't imagine that's going to be a thing, Jamie.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think that's going to be a name for Notre Dame. So we'll just kind of say that. That was a thing about over a decade ago, right? And so I think Notre Dame can do better than that. But let's talk about James Montgomery, the running back coach for Boise State. Obviously had a very good year with Ashton Genty as his running back. But so let's talk a little bit about him. He didn't make the list. Let's go into that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Genty's an amazing player, right. And you watch a ton of him just because he's on all the time, and obviously it was like a Heisman Trophy thing, so you see that, and obviously that's, I think, when you look at how one kind of like just small detail of like he always had that kind of like stand-up style with his stance, where whatever some coaches are like, nah, you got to do this stance, whatever, but he was like, well, this is what the guy's most comfortable with, and this is whatever. And I mean, it was pretty good to just keep him comfortable in his stance and not having to adjust. There was no need to adjust, and it paid off. But I really don't know enough about him as someone who could be a potential thing, other than Genty was awesome. And, right. He clearly did a good job with him, but like what he's been a West Coast guy. He's been at West Coast programs. He hasn't really been at a program like Notre Dame. Not to say that he couldn't be, like maybe he is the guy, but he was not top of mind for me. Someone there, but I mean, certainly if like all of a sudden you heard he was a candidate, you wouldn't be like, okay, I'd be like, I guess that makes sense. They talked to him. So I went, I mean, I obviously, whenever you're looking at this, I think people always go and they look and they just start like naming, like, so I'm like these people like, what about Thomas Hammock? I'm like, Thomas Hammock, he's still a head coach. Like he's not, he just beat Notre Dame. Like that's, and literally, I mean, go and listen to the 400 podcasts he did after he beat Notre Dame. Like he'll tell you about it. Like he was a very good running back coach, coached obviously in the NFL, but like, why would he take a thing to be a position coach at Notre Dame? I mean, if he wants to be a position coach, he could be a position coach in the NFL right now if he wanted to do that. So someone's saying like Eddie George, like Eddie George is like, I mean, as far as I know, he's still the head coach of Tennessee State, and he probably wants to keep going and do other things. Like, I don't really know why someone like that would want to do that. Like, I don't understand why. I mean, there are guys who have obvious connections to Marcus Freeman that I thought about as names, but I'm like, these guys, they're NFL running back coaches right now. Yeah. So I just don't really see like a pathway for that. So kind of getting that out of the way for people who are just kind of throwing names out. Like
Jonas Gray still out there. So that's something to monitor.
Jonas Gray. Yeah.
He's going to be throwing his name in the ring one more time. But who are you thinking of?
Yeah. So Devin Spalding, who's the Wisconsin's running back coach right now. I mean, I think it's obvious when there's someone who's there. He's obviously works for Fickle right now. He was a guy who was a GA at Cincinnati in 2019. So that means he worked with Mike Denbrock, Gino Gattuoli, Mike Brown. Obviously, Freeman was on staff then. He went and afterwards he went and worked at Youngstown State before he was at Wisconsin. He's been at Wisconsin the last 2 years, but and he worked with Doug Phillips, who's another Cincinnati. It's like they're all connected. Relationships matter. Relationships totally matter. And also too, not just like relationships, but like, hey, this guy's a good coach. This guy's a good recruiter, whatever, all this kind of stuff, right? Like that kind of stuff really, because it just makes it so much easier. If that person is going to be top of, could be like top of mind. That's why like Mike Brown got that job, right? Like all of that. So, I mean, easily he's someone I think who should is probably going to be a candidate unless there's something that, they didn't like about him, but I doubt it, considering, he's kind of gone on, the way he has. He's done a pretty good job with the backs of Wisconsin. And obviously they landed a couple 4-star backs in the previous class too, which, they can do at Wisconsin. They don't always do. Right. So, that's kind of like a feather in his cap. So he's a name to know. Stan Drayden, who was just fired as the head coach at Temple from this past season. He was there for 3 years, didn't have a good run at Temple as the head coach, but man, the guy's got like 3 decades of like college coaching success, coaching the running back position. Right. And I mean, he was also, numerous big time schools, but also at Ohio State during their national championship run. Chris Ash on the staff there was at Texas during the time that Ash was there. Right. So he is, one of these guys who's, always going to be, his name is always going to be out there in the mix as somebody who is like a high profile guy. Right. So if you're looking for someone who's like a McCullough like equivalent, he's pretty darn close. Like that is there. And I mean, that's another guy too, is like Larry Porter is another guy, right? Who his name kind of came up when it was like possibly, it was like, are they going to get McCullough, whatever. He was a guy who came up in the last time it was open, and he's was at North Carolina most recently. He was a special teams coordinator and the running backs coach. Obviously did a great job there with a lot of guys there. Omari and Hampton put up big numbers there. I mean, he's been at LSU, Texas, Auburn, North Carolina. I mean, when we're talking about like the fumble thing, Omari and Hampton, 1,600 yards, 281 carries, 1 fumble, right? Like that's always a good thing. But like he's been a good coach for many, many years. And I would imagine like that's a guy, and he's unemployed right now, right? So
he's unemployed because he was on Mac Brown's staff.
He was on Mac Brown's staff, yeah.
Right. So it's one of those things where like, running back openings come open or whatever, or they haven't come open yet, or, I mean, he's the type of guy who can be kind of choosy. Maybe he wanted to take a break. If Notre Dame comes calling, that might be something. Like his name was intriguing to me just because of the pedigree and the fact that it would make kind of a lot of sense, right? And just in terms of he's unemployed right now, but the reason for it isn't failure. It's just simply because of circumstance.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of like an easy phone call to make, I guess. So he was intriguing to me. So I'm monitoring the Larry Porter situation.
Darrell Sims, who's at Tennessee and is Tennessee's running back coach. Obviously, Dylan Sampson had a monster year. That's a guy that, people are very well aware of. But I mean, wherever he's gone, the guys has done well. And he's been a guy who's like a riser up in the coaching ranks. Coach Corey Kiner at Cincinnati. He was at Cincinnati with Satterfield, not when Fickle was there, right? So it's Cincinnati, but it's not a Cincinnati connection, just for people who are aware of that. And then he was at Louisville and he coached Jawar Jordan, who, I mean, Notre Dame fans are aware of after what he did against them too. So just his guys have put up numbers everywhere he's gone. He's got a good rep as a good coach and a good recruiter. And I mean, good coaches keep hiring him. And he's also, I just, sometimes you just look for these like kind of like little connections, and like Deland McCullough's in that group. Our guy JB, John Bryce wrote about that running back coaches and believers kind of like group text that they have that with like, he wrote about it during like the CFP back in January, and it was about all these coaches who are there and they just like share messages and they're tight and whatever, right? It's like a separate thing. They're not even talking ball. They're just talking about like, faith and different things there. So that's just one of those guys that if whether or not, McCullough recommends him or not, like, I mean, I would guess if you asked about him, he's a guy that he'd be like, yeah, he's a good person, so that kind of, that's something that kind of stuck out to me too. If you're looking for like some kind of like weird connection there that could connect them like that, that's something there. I'm sure he gets paid well at Tennessee, but I don't know. He's a guy who's jumped from job to job. Notre Dame's a good job. They got really good backs to think. So I mean, he would be a name to watch. Jeremy Larkin, to me, he's kind of like the probably one step below Spalding in terms of like, because he hasn't coached at a Power 4 school in terms of being the position coach, he's at UMass right now, and he was at Youngstown State before, but he was on Notre Dame staff in 2022. He was there the first year. He got hired after he was a graduate assistant at Northwestern. People might remember he was a back for Northwestern too. So if that's a guy that they circled on their sheet of saying like, hey, this is a guy who's going to be something, like, we keep him in mind for future reference. Like that also might be a guy that, Deland McCullough vouches for, or Freeman vouches for, frankly, right? Because of like how he is as a worker and stuff too. So I think, it's easy to just say like dismiss someone like that and be like, he just got hired at UMass or whatever. But it's like, that's exactly the kind of thing of like when, maybe people won't like this, but I think people who know would like it, just saying like Tommy Rees was a guy who kind of had that similar kind of thing where it's just like, well, we got this trust in him, we're going to do it. Yeah. So he's a young guy. I mean, I wouldn't say he's a likely guy, but if his name came up and he was like someone who was up in the position, wouldn't be shocked at all. And then I've just heard good things about this EJ Barthel from Nebraska, who's a running backs coach there. He's got a reputation as a good coach and evaluator. Another kind of thing when it's like a bit of a connection, right? James Blanchard, who was with Matt Rule Matt Rule is obviously at Nebraska right now. James Blanchard went with Matt Rule to the Carolina Panthers. Barthel went to the Carolina Panthers with them as well. He's someone who's worked in personnel and recruiting. He's got a relationship. Barthel's got obviously some kind of relationship with Blanchard. They know each other. That would be maybe somebody to watch there, right? Yeah. Like,
Blanchard get the job?
Should Blanchard get the job? And I think as of right now, I'd say it's still trending in that direction, right? So, that just would be just like kind of like more of like a sleeper name to watch. I mean, certainly there's other names out there. I mean, I haven't read anyone else's lists. I try to not read anyone else's lists before I do anything with mine, just to not get influenced. But I went back and forth with Matt on a few guys, and there could be other people that pop up. Like certainly I thought about at least Mike Hart, because he was someone who was like, he was about before.
Yeah, he was a name.
Yeah.
Prior to that.
But then I wasn't quite sure about what happened with him in Michigan and him not staying there. It was a little bit murky of like what happened there. Obviously there was a whole bunch of murkiness with Michigan and their whole thing. I don't even know if you want to even touch any of that. So that's why I just
if he ever becomes a name, we can go back into that. Yeah. But today, I don't know that that's a big deal. Beefeater ND08. I think this is a good question because there is degrees to this sort of thing. Considering the talent in the running back room, do you ask the players who they'd want as a coach? There is a situation where Marcus Freeman isn't going to go to Jeremiah Love and say, like, who are you thinking about, right? Like, because Jeremiah Love doesn't know, right? But when they bring in a coach, right, and they interview, he might have him meet Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and mostly the older guys, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is kind of their last year or whatever. And it's like, how do you vibe with them, right? Like,
yeah.
That
definitely happens.
Yeah. And that is a thing. So go into kind of the degree. I know there was a big thing with Colin Klein in the quarterbacks and being the OC, and that was kind of a thing where it's like, I don't know.
I think that was maybe one of the reasons why it didn't work out.
Yeah, like there was something off with that situation, and so I don't want to say the players vetoed it, but look, you got to take it into consideration, right? So just kind of go into how much do you think that plays a role and how it plays a role in terms of the decision-making process. Like, it usually doesn't happen, but players could veto a coach or at least say, like, I'm just going to be honest, like, I'm not really vibing this guy. Do what you want to do, but I'm just being honest. You're asking my opinion. That is the thing that happens. Kind of go into that and what the process would be there.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone would have some kind of pull or more influence as a player. I can't imagine there'd be too many other people on the team other than Jeremiah Love as it currently stands to do that. So if he said something specifically about like you said, didn't Bible, I think that could have an impact on what they do there. But I think also for the most part, like those players don't go into those meetings with these guys with intention thinking of like, I'm skeptical of these guys. They go in there with like an open mind thinking like, hey, I'm excited to kind of meet this guy, whatever. Right. So I think that, and it's also too, even though we can say it's not the NBA, where the NBA is very much like so much. It's like LeBron might as well be a player coach, like he basically has for many of the years, right? Like he has so much influence over everything, and whatever, fair enough, he's earned it over the time. But like there's so much of that where they control so much there, and in football, not so NFL, college football, whatever, you just don't have that kind of influence over anything. It would have to be something that really kind of was a red flag to make it not that way.
And I bet you, like, if there's a situation where the players are like, I don't know, coach, like this doesn't feel right to me, that sort of thing may already be like on the radar of like Marcus Freeman, right? Like you're not like completely great with the staff, and then with the players you're just totally a zero, like that's not how it works. Like they would have the inkling, like maybe with Colin Klein, and I'm not trying to break news here or anything, like I don't know for a fact or step on any previous reporting, but like if Colin Klein didn't really vibe with the players, there's a very good chance he didn't really vibe with the Marcus Freeman.
With the staff.
Or so like it wouldn't be out of left field, right? So that's usually how it is. But it's not nothing. I they're not going to be like, you choose, right? Pick your favorite guy. And I think the players kind of know, like what their place is in this situation, right? Like we're players. We don't make the hires. You make the hires. If you're asking me my opinion, and if I have a strong one, I'll give it. But that's kind of how it should be, right? Like that's how a healthy program kind of goes through things. They're talking about Chris Ashton here. There is a little there is a little bit of like, so Matt has posted on the Irish Sports Daily website about former players talking about Chris Ashton, the way that he coached them. And look, I think it's pretty clear that the first player went on record and talked about it, and then the second player was anonymous, I think, because he's still playing. He's still out there playing the sport. Talked about how they keep calling him an a-hole, right? Like, and I think there are levels to that, right? In terms of like the type of a-holeness that a player will tolerate, right? I'm curious to get your experience with that. Have you had a coach that you would describe that way? And was that a negative thing or was it a positive thing? Do you have positive feelings about that person? Should that be the case? And why is it kind of acceptable to some players and maybe not others, the type of a-hole, I guess, that a coach is?
I've had a-holes. Yeah, I definitely have had a-holes as coaches. And I think there's a difference though between someone, if there's someone who's like degrading to be degrading, and then there's someone who's like, hey, I'm going to get after you because you didn't do your job. Like I'm going to, I'm going to hold you accountable, and, I'm going to cuss you out, and I'm going to do this, whatever. But I'm also going to like be the first guy to like, pat you on the back when you do a great job too. Right. So I think there's a balance there, right? Like if some guy is 100% a-hole all the time, just my opinion, I'm like, that's not a good coach. Like that's not someone who can do anything. But then also too, it's like the coaches earn your respect by being good. Did you get better is everyone playing well? Are you getting the best out of your players? Right. And I think that was obviously something that both of those guys expressed, like he got the best out of them. So when there's that, I mean, that to me that's very much Harry Heastand, right? That is very much Harry Heastand. And you know what? Maybe some guys that won't work for, and that is so it is something to, I think, to actually monitor, because you never know, especially in today's day and age too, where guys can, when Ash was at Ohio State, you could be a little bit more like that because guys aren't going in the portal. It's not the same.
And Urban Meyer was like that.
Yes. Right. But I mean, as Matt pointed out too, like, I think people have a view of Marcus Freeman as like, like, oh, man, look at this good looking cat just coming up
like
here, doing all
coach,
smooth
like
and the whatever, right? Like a
also,
player's coach.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the players like him. Like, that's a thing. But he will get after people. Like, he gets after people. I've seen him do it. And I know, and I've heard about him doing it. Like, he is someone when he talks about, like, I don't even think he really had the intention of talking about how, like, before the Army game of being like the violence or whatever, right? But it's just like, that's how he talks about football, and he loves that. And I've talked to guys who've played for him, and they're like, yeah, he likes guys who play on the edge, right? Like, that's what he likes. That's who he was. So that's what he likes too, right? So that's why, like, people could say like Jordan Botello was a certain thing, and it's like about reining him in to a certain thing, but he loves Jordan Botello. Like, he loved Maris. Like, he loved guys who just like would light people up and whatever.
Like Drake Bowen.
I bet like Drake Bowen, perfect example. Like, I bet he loved Charles Jagusah jumping on Abdul Carter after he's on the ground there, because he's like, this is a guy who's like he understood the assignment, right? Yeah. It's like, we're getting after these guys, right? So I think that's something that you want to have, and that's kind of the mentality of the team anyways. It's like, if guys meet that level, then it's fine. And you just don't want to run away someone who could be a great player. But I mean, I think it's, in general, the fact that you're coaching guys who are like play safety, like, those guys are, first of all, very smart for the most part. Like, some of the smartest guys out there. I'm not just saying this to pump Greg's tires here, but like, safety is some of the smartest guys out there. And so, like, safeties, linebackers, they're asked the most of out of everyone on the defense in terms of just knowing everything and communicating and whatever. So you have to really, like, you have to hold those guys accountable in a certain way. And maybe he will do it a little bit harder than an Al Golden. But I'll tell you what, if he's making the calls that get you off the field on third down, that he sees something from the offense, that he makes a change during the game and helps you win a game, people they're going to love him. Like, that's just how it is. Right. Or like, look at how many people talk about like Lou Holtz, and they're like, man, I hated him when I played. And it's like, man, he's the best coach I ever had. Like, that's just one of those things.
Yeah, I think part of it is, when you read those articles that Matt wrote in the Q&As, they always say coach was right. He was right about everything that he said. The other part is, a player, like, they'll take grief from a coach if they think that they are doing it because they care and they want them to get better. If you're doing it just to, like you said, degrade, if you're just degrading me and you're riding me for the sake of riding me and you're just being a jerk, then that's different.
Yeah.
Right? And you got to be consistent, right? You can't say one thing and then get mad about something else. Like, well, then you're just yelling at me to yell at me, and you're just like basically abusing me. Like, anyone can kind of, there's not really a softness to it. It's just more of like, well, I'm not going to get abused by you. Right. And I think what people take for softness in today's era with players is not, it's less softness and more of like empowerment to say, I'm not going to actually put up with this. Because I think the behavior itself is is out of line. But like when you were out of line, like in our era, like you could just be out of line and you just had to put up with it. And a coach would just put you through hell, basically.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas now, I think the player is more empowered. It's like, actually, you're a jerk. I'm not going to put up with this, and I'll just leave. Right. Because I don't need to. Because like you said, Marcus Freeman is a hard ass. Right. He just is. And so we know that about him. But obviously, the players respond to it because look at that. Who wasn't going in the portal? Notre Dame had 3 players going to the portal for the whole thing. Like you had starting linemen not go in the portal. You had Steve Angeli not go in the portal, right? Like you had players who were obviously going to move on, but they stayed because they respected what Notre Dame was doing. They respected the program, right? So I think with Chris Ash, it's like, look, if you're yelling at me, but you're trying to make me better and you're trying to, you care about my development and you're telling me the right things, and it's like I've really come to understand this when it's about like my daughter's soccer team. Like their coach is very, very hard on them, and he is hard on them in a way that I think, especially for their age, is like there were times in the beginning where I was like, man, you're this is very borderline, but they all love him, and he clearly cares about them, and it also helps that they have leaps and bounds gotten a lot better. And that is not just at the, the U11 level, right? Like that's all levels. As long as you care. And there's a thing, and as someone who is in education too, kids know when you care and they know when you don't.
They're smart.
People sense it. And it's like people will put up with a lot of that's why some kids like they take a lot of grief from their dads or their parents or whatever, because they know they care about them. And so to me, it's just like everything you've kind of read about Chris Ash is like everyone's saying like, yeah, he was an a-hole. He was a hard ass.
It honestly sounds like my dad. Like I've not to make it personal, but like my dad obviously he coached high school for 30 years. He goes and helps my nephew's 11 and is he's playing football, like youth football, and like like he goes, like the coaches that are out there, it's not like they're not great coaches. Like they don't know what they're doing. So he's someone who's obviously very successful football coach for years, goes out to help out and stuff. These kids, they're too young to deal with it, and he's from a different era.
Yeah.
So he just gets so frustrated with them and whatever. And honestly, they can't handle some of those things. But like, I mean, there's a lot of people that I'm sure that they were like dreading. Like there would have been one kid that I was like, that when I coached with my dad, that he made this guy do this drill, I don't know how many times over and over again. And he was screwing it up for everybody. And and I would have thought, man, this guy is just gonna like shrink. He probably hates my dad or whatever. I heard him like a couple years later, he came out and helped at like this other football camp we were coaching at. He was talking to these kids about my dad and how they need to listen to him. It was like his favorite guy in the world. My dad was his favorite guy in the world. I'm like, this guy, if anyone would have done that, right? But it's like when there's respect, and he knew that my dad actually cared about him and stuff, like you said. So that kind of stuff, it does make a big difference.
Yeah, it matters. Back Bay 22 says when Blanchard stays at Texas Tech, people will freak. I'm just using this comment to transition to that conversation for a second. First of all, people will freak. They shouldn't, but they will, because that's the nature of things. But I think as far as where things stand with Blanchard, like you said it's kind of trending in the direction that he's going to end up at Notre Dame. We have to see, right? I think there's a perceived lack of movement. And obviously, like whenever there's an information vacuum, people will fill the vacuum with their anxieties and their, this never ends up well for Notre Dame. There's a delay in the sense that we want information, or people want information. And when there's not, it's like, okay, well, it's delayed. It must be going bad. Like we don't know what's going on. We don't know why things have you know, they were going hot and heavy over the weekend. He was at Notre Dame. He was, you know, having interviews and meeting with players and meeting with various people at Notre Dame. And now it's Thursday and there's no word on what the situation is. We don't know why that is. It could be anything. We just got to be patient, right?
I think it's stuff that isn't related to, you know, him deciding between like more money here and there. I think it's less to do with that. And there's other stuff. And I don't even think it's a background check either, too. So it's just like
it could be anything. Like
things will get settled. Like honestly, by the end of this podcast, we could hear something.
And I'm monitoring. Yeah. I'm always monitoring these things, checking the internets and things of that nature. We just got to be patient. You know, we'll find out. And if for whatever reason it doesn't happen with him, Notre Dame will get another GM. I think that I don't want anyone else to leave because I don't want to have the conversation of like this is not good, right? It like for Deland McCullough, it would be better if he stayed at Notre Dame, right? Continuity, all those other things. It doesn't bring in any variables with as far as players and you know, maybe Jadarian Price is like, you know, I really wanted to play for Deland McCullough. Now I want to start looking around. We don't know that that's true. I'm just making an example. And so I don't want to have the conversation of like, you know, it would be better if he stayed, but Notre Dame, they just got to make a good hire now and it'll be fine, right? We did it with Chad. We did it with Al Golden. Now we're doing it with Deland McCullough. If the GM falls through, we're going to have to do it again then. I don't like that. I don't like saying that over and over again, but it's true every single time. So, you know, it's just, it's hard for people to be patient, but you got to be patient. They'll make the right move for them. And we'll see where it goes. You can make the right move for your small business, Jamie, or your social media page or your highlight reel. You can make the right move there. It's very easy to do. You just go with VSR Media, founded by Notre Dame football pregame host and Emmy Award-winning anchor Vahid Sadrazadeh. VSR Media provides professional and cinematic video and photo. Whether you're looking for a collegiate or pro-level highlight reel, have a personal story to tell, or aiming to diversify and grow your business, VSR Media specializes in short and long-form video storytelling, social media management, and website design. VSR Media also captures professional headshots, senior and sports photos. Contact them at vsrmediacompany.com. Mention Irish Sports Daily to receive 20% off your first project. Visit them online or give them a call at 574-800-9106. Jamie, it's Thursday. And that means that 6 Thoughts on a Thursday is out on irishsportsdaily.com, written by one Jamie University, Jamie Uyeyama. Go check it out. There's a piece in there that I want to talk about as it relates to the way that Notre Dame selects their players. And it goes beyond, and this is kind of like, it kind of goes to our last conversation about Blanchard, and he's a big traits guy. Like you gotta hit kind of minimums, right? If you're a corner, I want you to be this size. I want you to be this fast. I want you to hit, you know, this on the vertical and things of that nature, measurables. And Notre Dame is in on that, but they're also in on some other things that have nothing to do with that. And I'm going to read something. Oh, Mark Youngman says 6 Thoughts was particularly good today. You know what, Jamie?
Thanks,
you know what
Mark.
that means? You know what that means to me, Jamie? You continue to.
It means elevate. I wrote a lot of positive stuff because people like when I write positive stuff.
No. You continue to elevate, Jamie. Continue to elevate. That's the deal right there. See what I did there? It's like it's like a Marcus Freeman thing. The motto: elevate.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's bring in a quote from Al Golden talking about guys that they want to bring in. As they come to visit, you have meetings, Golden explained. Are they waiting for lunchtime or asking questions? Max, this is referring to Max Bulla, does a great job with individual meetings of showing them the techniques, scheme, and how it applied to them. Each linebacker is different. You have Jaden Osbury and Kingston Villiamoasa in the same linebacker room, but they have different body types and different things that they bring to the overall defense. Max does a great job of showing the players the future and how they'll be used. If they're not inquisitive, then maybe they're not for us, and that's okay. Not everyone is for Notre Dame. At the end of the day, we have a clear picture of what we're looking for at that position. So he's talking about linebackers, but you could also be talking about really any position at Notre Dame, because the love of the game, and this is I think this is the hardest part about recruiting, is deciding who is the one that when they get to Notre Dame, they are going to be self-sufficient and self-motivated to the point where they are not going to allow themselves to fail. And I think for me, having talked to Drake Bowen after he committed to Notre Dame, he was at a baseball camp in Ohio somewhere. I did an interview with him. You can search for it. And the thing about talking to him was it wasn't just the interview that I did with him. It was the fact that the way that he handled that day in getting ready for the interview. He was busy. He was at a baseball tournament. We had scheduled it, and then things had changed around him. But he kind of like jumped through hoops to make sure that he lived up to the commitment that he had made to me. And he was like in between games, he made time for this interview. And just talking to him, I was like, there is no way that this kid is failing at Notre Dame. There's 0% chance. And there were shows after that where I was like, he is going to be a 3-year starter and he's going to be a multi-year captain. And I think that's actually going to turn out to be correct. But it's just like, you can get a feel for these guys that has as much to do with their physical ability, and so much more to do with just their personality and the type of person that they are. Just kind of talk about this. And is this the type, like the hard part for you when evaluating players and how they're going to, like, because you don't really have this information. Just talk about how important this kind of concept is and when evaluating players, and why it's beneficial to Notre Dame to keep as the way that they evaluate the talent that they bring into Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think that is the hardest part, because you can see somebody just dominate at a 7-on-7 camp because they are just so much better than anyone else. You could see Drake Bowen play at his level of football in Indiana. And, I watched a game of his live where he was clearly the best athlete on the field and whatever. And there were some other guys who were D1, there's a couple D1 receivers and DBs out there. Yeah, Drake Bowen was the best athlete on the field there. But that's, and I don't want to take away from his athleticism because he's a great athlete, but that's not what got him and why he played at a high level at his age right now. Is because of exactly what you said, his love for the game, his passion to like learn and elevate and whatever, do all of these things to become better. And it's something I kind of wrote about in August as well, because that's one thing that when you get a chance to talk to these guys in spring, in fall camp, what you do when you get a chance to talk to those guys, kind of more big picture stuff when it's not in the season, when you're not talking about things that just happen in the game or things that are going to happen in this other game, you get to dive deeper a little bit more onto that stuff. And then it just became so obvious when I was talking to like Jordan Clark, and when, Rod Hurd and these guys were like, yeah, obviously these guys are going to do well at Notre Dame because they're like obsessed with football and really like they're smart football players. Like they care about like little details that matter. And that's why those guys came in and had success. Right. And you look at like all these guys and also too, like the way that all the linebackers, when you have like mentorship from like a guy like Jack Kaiser, when before that Bertrand was like, and Maris were like their mentors, these guys too, right? In terms of what to do. Like you look at Maris, part of the reason he got drafted where he got drafted, obviously these guys got traits too, right? But like part of the reason of why he got drafted there was because, Mike Zimmer said he came into on their visit and he was like, he knew what everyone was doing on the defense. He explained everything. He could break it down. And like, man, this guy's a smart football player. This guy likes ball. Like, and that kind of stuff does matter. And it is hard to evaluate because even even people think like D lineman, and I'll say this too, like as a former defensive lineman, you need to know the least amount of total defense from a defensive line standpoint out of any other position on the field. And really, like out of like scheme wise in total, you know the least, because you really don't have to worry most of the time about what the coverage that's being played behind you. You understand certain things of, okay, well, we're playing man here, we're running a pressure here, whatever. Maybe, you attack things differently, but for the most part, you're not dealing with it. You're just dealing with your assignment. But you have to understand, like, hey, if I get this block here, this is what this probably means. You have to understand these things. And if guys don't care about those details, you can't just be some freak of nature that just goes and do it. Like those guys, I mean, they're not good players. That's why you see some of these guys, you're like, why wasn't this guy better? Why wasn't Steve Filer like the best friggin' edge rusher that Notre Dame ever had? Why didn't he become this great linebacker? It's like, well, he didn't have these other things that some of these other guys have. And so when you hear stuff about like, and that was something that you can see it sometimes on film with certain guys like KVA. It was just so obvious. This guy's like, man, this guy's just a smart football player. Matt Fermo, this guy's a smart football player. Like you can see these things, and that does matter, right? But not all the guys you can totally see it with, and you have to know you really care. And that's also why Matt did a piece on Al Washington and him talking about evaluating, and he talked about like seeing things with Bryce Young when they worked in camp, that it was like he was 215 pounds at that time. I mean, I was like, but he saw how he worked and how he responded to adversity and certain things. And it was like, well, this guy's going to be something. Like he's got that. And you learn some of those things from camp and from coaching them and how they react, how they learn things, how quickly they pick stuff up. Which that has been a big evaluation point for Notre Dame, and why I don't want to see that gone, because I think that is just so important, because you can have a bunch of guys, like there's a reason why it took Jalen Sneed this long to, start becoming this thing. It was like, he needed to put in the work to get there, and he did put in the work. And that's why he started to take off as a player this season, and why it didn't happen for him before, because he didn't have all of that there. Right. Yeah. So it just matters so much, and it's so important. There's just so many guys there where when we're talking about like what makes a difference, like no one wants to miss out on Luke Kuechly. Everyone always talks about like, man, Notre Dame, one of their biggest, why didn't they offer whatever? It's like, well, why didn't all those people offer him? They probably should have known that this guy was like the smartest football player that ever like that maybe ever lived, like you need to know that kind of stuff, because when you get someone there, that can totally change your view on it, because all of a sudden a guy who runs, a 4.8 40 and a thing, Zach Thomas becomes Zach Thomas because of all these extra things. Right. And it matters.
And like Kennedy Urlacher is another good example.
Perfect example.
Just very curious about the game, cares about all the little things. Adon Schuler is a guy you just kind of tell, like he just all the little
absolutely
stuff, he absolutely cares about it, and it's very important to him. All right, so that was a good discussion here. We're gonna do a little sampler here. This question came in from Dan Arcuri. This is a longer conversation. We'll get into it more in the spring. But do you lean towards Angeli starting the Miami game because of experience, or do you go with a higher ceiling player in Carr? Are you concerned with ramifications if Angeli is picked to start? So here's the thing. They're going to have a camp. They're going to have spring and they're going to have fall. That'll be adjudicated then. We'll see who's still on the roster by the time the Miami game comes. I do have a specific point, because I have been thinking about this a little bit, and this latest season has really got me thinking about kind of an underappreciated skill of any quarterback, and that is sack avoidance and how to avoid the rush. And I very much worry about Steve Angeli's ability to do that. I don't think people realize how much Riley Leonard helped this offense simply by being the fact that it was very hard to sack him and get him on the ground and to cause negative plays. And again, he has I think it was a 12% pressure to sack rate, and Jelly was somewhere like 33%. I think that is like, if he can't get better at that, and I don't know how do you simulate that in practice, right? Like they must, hopefully they have a way. I assume they do. These coaches are very good. They can figure things out, but it's like, that is, in my opinion, that is kind of a fatal flaw. You throw the ball, how well you do this, that, and the other things. Like, obviously Steve Angeli can be effective, right? Of course he can. We've seen him. Oh, I like how he throws the ball. I like how the ball comes off his hand. I think that he's accurate. I think that he can make the throws that they need. If he can't avoid sacks, that to me is like, eesh, that's very, very dangerous. And the one thing that CJ Carr, like, I will always go back to the game that I saw as a junior that he played against, I think it's Gwinnett. Is it Gwinnett High School? I think out there.
Yeah.
They lost the game like 56 to like 40 something, right? And obviously they put up 40 points. His offense put up 40 points. So obviously he did very well. He was under siege that entire game, and he was able to make plays while that was the case. And like, Steve Angeli didn't really have to deal with that because he was at Bergen Catholic, and they were just an absolute force out there. And it was just like a different situation. I don't know, man. If you can't avoid sacks, it's tough, real tough. And by the way, Kenny Minchie too, like the same thing. And there's people saying like, I want to see, I have this kind of desperate need to see Kenny Minchie like take real snaps at Notre Dame. I like him a lot. But yeah, that's kind of where my head's at with this. Like I said, a little sampler, we'll get more into it later, but kind of where are your thoughts?
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And I know we talked about it. I know maybe the people didn't take it into account, but that's something that we talked about all year, right?
Yeah.
Was like, that was a huge thing, especially when the offensive line, like in the first half of the season, basically, they were getting their sea legs. Like they were not at the, where they were.
It was like consistent, like 35% pressure rate, like in every game.
Yeah.
If that's Angeli's getting crushed.
Yeah. And it has to be something where, I mean, it's part of it, because you look at like Tom Brady, and it's like understanding certain things. And I mean, I've obviously watched like the film of Ohio State, a bunch of times in terms of what they did. And like, one of the reasons Will Howard was so friggin' good in the game was he got the ball out. So he just knew right away. First of all, he escaped the rush when it was there. So that happened. But it also too, he was able to, like, there were times where like, man, Notre Dame got pressure, like quick. Yeah. Ball was out. And even if the ball wasn't complete on some of those, like the play where Travion Henderson, ran the railroad and X Watts almost picked it.
Yeah.
I mean, reality, he probably shouldn't have thrown the ball because it was, a pick. It was covered. By the way, PFF, who does this? Your friggin' stats here. This is my rant for the day. Why is that not a turnover worthy play? Put that on there, you losers. Like, whoever's doing it, come on. Like, it's not hard. It's not hard. Quit doing it. There's too much bias. Whoever's doing it. It's like, yeah, I understand the guy played awesome. He also had that one throw that, like, that was a throw. That was a turnover worthy play. But anyways, they didn't count it. Whatever. So that's my small mini rant for the day against PFF. But, that kind of thing, though, is just so huge. And if you look at, like, there's so many, like, hidden yardage that's gained from, like, not doing that. And there are people who study data who, like, look at it, and it's like, if a quarterback gets sacked on a thing, it drops the percentage of you scoring points on that thing significantly. Yeah. Significantly. So that does matter. And yes, Angeli hasn't played all that much. And certainly he steps into a game in that situation against Penn State. He's extremely poised, right? Extremely poised. but there's also kind of a little bit of like blinders to being like, I got to escape here. Or maybe he's just not someone who, some people don't have that feel for the rush. Some people just aren't good at escaping. There's just a thing there. But that was something that, like, if you look at like Gunnar Stockton in the game, it's like, yeah, he's a good athlete. He had zero feel for the rush. And so he was getting sacked when he was like, when Notre Dame had a chance to get sacked, he was getting sacked. Right. So that kind of stuff can just absolutely like make or break a drive. When we're talking about like penalties killing a drive, a sack kills a drive, right? So I think that is something, and to me, that is one of CJ Carr's superpowers, that he has that feel and he can escape. And frankly, too, like that is also one of the things with Minchie, too, like you said. Like, I think if you're going to say he's got a shot, obviously there's other pieces of it. You can't just have that. But it is a big part of it. And I think when you're looking at like, when they do the ESPN's QBR, which I really think QBR specifically for the college football is a really, really good metric. Like, I think it is a pretty good indicator of like who's actually the best quarterbacks in college football, because it adds in like, you know, rushing EPA and also takes out minus for sacks and all that. And, you know, Ryan Leonard was top 20 in the country at like, not just of it's not simple as avoiding sacks, but it's like how many like minus it went against him on the year. And he was huge. He was huge for Notre Dame in that way. Yeah, he didn't get enough credit, like you said, Greg.
Yeah, so I just, that's something for me. It's like, that is, you got to see if he's able to avoid sacks. If he can't, then he can't do it. Just, it doesn't matter how good you throw it, right? Like, unless you're like standing back there and you're throwing to like Andre Johnson and, you know, that guys like that. It's just, I don't know. But we'll talk more about that as we get into spring and that sort of thing, and we get some actual, you know, word on how these guys are doing. So we can end it there for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell so whenever it is, we are going to go live. Our next scheduled show will be Monday with Power Hour with Mike, and then we'll be back on Tuesday with our normal Hit and Hustle, unless there's breaking news before that. So we will continue to monitor the news reel on that. So have a good rest of your weekend, everyone. Jamie, who you got in the Super Bowl?
It's tough to pick against the Chiefs when you got just I just don't think you can pick against Mahomes. Like, my head says that Philly has a better team, but just, you know, they got Mahomes. One team has Mahomes and the other team doesn't. So I agree. I think the Eagles are better. I think the Saquon Barkley situation kind of makes it so. They got to stop the run, because if they don't, if Eagles can run the ball, they'll win the game.
Yeah. All right, but enjoy the Super Bowl, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. Keep hitting and hustling.